LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 3rd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to use my background as a former criminal defense attorney to analyze this week's historic topic, the indictment of Donald Trump, and I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. Now, I actually have two disappointments about doing this live stream today. First one is that they didn't release the indictment. It's not going to be released until tomorrow. And as a former criminal defense attorney, I can tell you that if you haven't read the indictment, it's all speculation. You don't really know how strong the charges are. You don't uh, really know how strong or weak the legal theories are. Even after we see the indictment tomorrow, we're still not going to know all the evidence. That's the other part. You need to know the charges. You need to know the evidence. Then you can talk about the strength of the case, which hasn't stopped a lot of people from talking about the strength of the case for the last couple weeks that I've been covering this. And actually, I think I might do another live stream on Wednesday, sometime in the middle of the day after I've had a chance to read the indictment. And of course, Donald Trump is giving his speech to the nation tomorrow night also. So, and then I can also look at how all the various media outlets covered the arraignment and charging of Donald Trump. So I think I can put all that together by sometime early afternoon on Wednesday. So look forward to that. So that was my one disappointment, that I haven't gotten to see the indictment yet. And then my second disappointment was Saturday Night Live. They actually did a good cold open with Donald Trump, and James Austin Johnson does a really good impression of Donald Trump. But I thought it would have been so awesome if they brought back criminally charged Alec Baldwin to uh, play criminally charged Donald Trump. That would have just been so that that would have been extra awesome, I think. But actually, James Austin Johnson does a really good impression of Donald Trump. In some ways, I mean, Alec Baldwin like makes it more of a cartoonish caricature that in some ways makes it more funny. I don't know, but uh, there's some great parts of the cold open. I put a link down in the video description to the whole thing, and I'm just going to show you like 30 seconds of it that I think show two things about Donald Trump that are definitely true, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Make no mistake, what the radical Democrats are doing to me is worse than any crime I've ever committed, and I've committed a lot, close to 34. Some are saying I'm going to use this indictment to rile up my base so that they give me more money. Not true. Not true. I don't want anything from my base except their love, their votes, perhaps their money. And I need their money more than ever.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, so I hit the wrong video there, or the wrong square. Almost restarted the show. No, the two things I liked about that impression from James Austin Johnson. Well, first, I mean, in addition to the content there, he really gets the voice and the cadence. And I don't know how much he's involved in the writing, but he did two things there that Trump often does. The whole thing about, they're claiming I want their money, I don't want their money, and then by the end of his statement, he's like saying, I need their money. And that's something Trump does, where he like says the opposite. He like, if you just wait like a minute or two, he totally contradicts himself. That happens a lot. And then at the beginning there, he like admitted to crimes, which I don't know if that was like a direct parody of what happened on Sean Hannity's show last week, but he pretty much admitted to like going through, asking to look through the boxes and keeping stuff, and in the Mar-a-Lago investigation. And that, I think, is another indictment that's going to be coming probably this spring. Uh, I think there's going to be at least one more, probably two more indictments this spring, as I've been saying for the last couple weeks. The Georgia indictment is probably coming in the next few weeks because that grand jury expires, I think, May 1st. So we can look forward to those charges. And anyway, I will have plenty of time to talk about criminal charges that Donald Trump is being investigated for and then eventually charged with and hopefully put on trial. We'll see. But now I'm going to show you the news summaries in order from longest to shortest. They were all pretty good. I mean, Fox News Sunday was a little different. And then CBS News Face the Nation, they like focused on tornadoes again at the beginning. I don't know why, but I guess tornadoes create good video of devastation, you know, like the if it bleeds, it leads kind of bias that media has. Maybe that's why they like covering tornadoes, but that's going to be the last of the news summaries, the shortest one. Here's the longest one, ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos, along with two reporters, Aaron Katersky talks about what's going on in New York in preparation for Trump's arraignment, and then Rachel Scott talks about the Republican reaction or the political reaction to Trump being indicted, especially amongst Republicans. I'm actually going to have two Republicans on clips later. If you look down in the video description, I have short summaries of all the clips. And if you get to clip number 9 and clip number 7 and 9, 7 is Governor Asa Hutchinson, who announced he's running for president and criticized Trump and said he should drop out of the race. That's in clip 7. And then clip 9, John Bolton says something really funny about Trump that is a good reason to keep watching all the way to clip 9. But now I'm going to get to the news summaries and, the political reaction, the preparations in New York from Aaron Katersky and Rachel Scott after George Stephanopoulos' introduction over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. How many times in the last decade or so have we described a political development as historic, unprecedented, never seen before? I've lost count. And this week, the norm-busting impact of Donald Trump on our body politic may have reached its peak. On Thursday, we learned that he's the first president ever to face criminal indictment. And as we come on the air this morning, that twice impeached former president, also under criminal investigation for trying to overturn an election he lost, is now his party's top candidate for the White House in 2024. With statements of support from 6 governors, 26 senators, the Speaker of the House, and 63 other House Republicans. That's where things stand right now, 2 days before Trump is scheduled to surrender to authorities in Manhattan. We'll analyze all the fallout this morning. Senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky starts us off. Good morning, Aaron.
George, good morning to you. This is going to be an historic and just unbelievable moment for the nation as someone who once occupied the Oval Office walks the same dim courthouse halls here as thugs and mobsters and petty criminals.
2 days from now, the defendant in the People of the State of New York against Donald J. Trump will surrender to face about 24 criminal counts, an extraordinary and jarring moment for a country divided by partisan disagreements. The first indictment of a former American president was handed up not for election tampering or inciting an insurrection, but for allegedly doctoring the books when accounting for hush money paid to a porn actress, arranged on the eve of the 2016 election by Trump's one-time fixer, Michael Cohen.
I mean, this is a man who held up the Bible and said he's never apologized to God because he's never done anything wrong. He doesn't understand accountability. And right now, Alvin Bragg has finally put that into his lap.
The investigation is focused on whether Trump disguised his reimbursement of Cohen as ordinary legal expenses. The specific charges are sealed until Trump appears before a judge. That is expected Tuesday, when the former president is driven from his Fifth Avenue apartment to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, which for days has been surrounded by metal barricades. The NYPD and the U.S. Secret Service have already choreographed the appearance. Trump will not be handcuffed, but he will be processed as a criminal defendant before walking down a 15th floor hallway for arraignment. The floor was sealed off for days in advance.
You know, we'll go in there and we'll proceed to see a judge at some point, plead not guilty.
On social media, Trump has taken aim at the judge assigned to the case. He has attacked the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, and summoned his supporters to protest. None materialized so far, though police are bracing for them. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is advertising a rally for Trump on the day of his arraignment, and authorities are monitoring a surge in online rhetoric calling for violence in response to the indictment.
Trump is not going to be here at court very long. As soon as his arraignment is over, we're told he's going to head straight to the airport, fly to Florida to resume his campaign. George, should this case go to trial, Trump could be here for weeks, right as he tries to seek the White House again. George?
Okay, Aaron, thanks. Let's get more on the political fallout now from Rachel Scott. And Rachel, so far, at least, top Republicans seem to be rallying behind Trump.
Exactly, George. And this is uncharted territory. Not only is former President Donald Trump the leading Republican candidate, he is also now a criminal defendant. Sources describe him as angry and defiant. His team is already strategizing about how to use this to his political advantage. Within minutes of that indictment being handed down, his team started fundraising off of it. The Trump campaign says they have allegedly raised $4 million. And the former president has spent a lot of his time calling top Republicans, telling them to rally to his defense. And most of them have. Most notably, one of his biggest potential rivals, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, calling the Manhattan DA a menace to society. The big question, how long will that type of support hold as we continue to learn more details about the charges in that indictment and as other investigations into the former president continue? But if there is one thing that we know about Donald Trump, he does not back down from controversy or scandal. And even with an unprecedented indictment, this time is proving to be no different, George.
Okay, Rachel Scott, thanks very much. Let's bring in Donald Trump's attorney now, Joe Tacopina. Joe, thanks for joining us.
I will have a Joe Tacopina clip, though not from ABC, because ABC had Asa Hutchinson on to declare his candidacy for president. And I'll have a clip of Asa Hutchinson from ABC, and then I think Joe Tacopina is clip number 11 with Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union. You saw that chyron there, like Trump campaign claims to raise $4 million. And I think it was good that Rachel Scott said allegedly raised $4 million. Because, I mean, think about this. Someone who is is raising money off of being charged with campaign finance fraud. We're supposed to believe their fundraising numbers without, I mean, and I think they were like claiming up to 7 million. I think I want to see the receipts before I believe anything about the campaign that anything the Trump campaign says about how well they're doing. Let's see what they file with the FEC or whatever. But that was, and I think ABC handled it best. I think in each of these news summaries, they make that less and less clear as to the Trump campaign's claims of how much money they've raised. And you saw a brief description of Ron DeSantis's support for Donald Trump. Apparently he got some blowback a couple weeks ago when this story first broke, when Trump claimed he was going to be arrested on a different Tuesday, and Ron DeSantis did sort of a backhanded support where he did attack the district attorney in Manhattan as a George Soros-backed DA or whatever, but he also said, I don't know about paying hush money to a porn star. I don't know about that. And he's not saying any of that now. And in fact, one of the things I wish they had shown on these programs was Ron DeSantis claiming he would fight the extradition of Donald Trump, which is totally gratuitous because Donald Trump is going to surrender anyway, so there is no extradition. And if you have, I give out these ACLU constitutions. If you become a $5 a month patron on Patreon, there's a link right under the video. Become a $5 a month patron on Patreon. If you give me a shipping address, I will send you this ACLU Constitution. Or you can just give me a one-time donation through PayPal right under the video description. If you give me a shipping address, I will give you this ACLU Constitution. And on page 19 of that Constitution, you'll see Article 4, Section 2, which, second paragraph, a person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime who shall flee from justice and shall be found in another state shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. So, yeah, even if Ron DeSantis I talked about this briefly a couple weeks ago, if Ron DeSantis were to fight this imaginary extradition of Donald Trump from Florida that isn't even going to happen. If he said no, a federal court would just order him to extradite Trump because it would. Ron DeSantis basically made up an imaginary situation in which he said he'd violate the Constitution for Donald Trump, is the point I'm trying to make. And I wish they had shown that more, or they didn't show that part of his support of Trump. They did mention his DeSantis's support of Trump in that last story, and I think in this next news summary, NBC News Meet the Press, which is also pretty good, maybe not quite as good as the ABC one, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. For the first time in American history, a former president of the United States has been indicted on criminal charges. Mr. Trump plans to travel to New York on Monday, stay overnight at Trump Tower, before being arraigned on Tuesday in Manhattan criminal court on charges related to hush money payments made to buy the silence of adult film star Stormy Daniels just before the 2016 presidential election. Now, the exact charges remain under seal, but according to our reporting, Trump faces about 30 charges of document-related fraud. The Associated Press is reporting that at least one of those charges is a felony charge. Now, Trump's 2024 rivals have jumped to his defense, calling the indictment un-American, a travesty, an outrage, more about revenge than it is about justice, and saying it should not happen in America. And the party, with exceptions you can literally count on one hand, has followed suit. Here's a sampling.
The unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States on a campaign finance issue is outrageous.
It's the archetypal abuse of the prosecutorial function to engage in a political hit job.
They want a picture of Donald Trump in handcuffs. They want a mugshot.
Now he turns around purely for political purposes and indicts a former president on misdemeanor offenses that they're straining to try to convert into felonies.
This is going to destroy America.
It is notable that Governor DeSantis conceded that Trump may have committed misdemeanors. Trump's indictment and subsequent trial will be a test for the rule of law. Will it further divide the nation or signal that no one is truly above the law? Recall that Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who has not commented on the indictment since it was reported on Thursday, but we should remind you what he said after voting to acquit Trump at his second impeachment trial.
We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
By the way, it's worth noting, being charged with or even convicted of a crime would not disqualify Trump from running for president or even from serving as president. So what is the political impact? Well, the Trump campaign is trying very hard to act as if this is helping him. They've even circulated internal polling to the press this weekend, showing that they are somehow increasing their lead over Ron DeSantis in the primary. And also, according to the campaign, he's raised more than $4 million in the first 24 hours. Of course, after the indictment. Of course, it was thanks to this flood of fundraising solicitations. The indictment is likely to freeze the presidential race on the GOP side for quite some time, because it's going to make it difficult for Trump's opponents to seize the spotlight and break through. And part of the reason for that, a whopping 72% of Republican voters still believe that to twice impeach Donald Trump has had mainly a positive impact on the GOP. That was according to a new Quinnipiac poll released this week. But of course, longer term, huge questions remain. Ultimately, whether this will be a political problem for Trump may depend on whether he faces a second indictment, maybe in Georgia, or a third indictment, or a fourth indictment by federal prosecutors here in Washington. So let's dig into the Manhattan case. Joining me now is former Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, who preceded.
And I do have a clip of Cyrus Vance, who I think broke some news on the Sunday shows that also hasn't gotten enough play, about how the Trump Justice Department told him to hold off on prosecuting Trump under New York law after Michael Cohen pled guilty to being directed to commit federal felonies by Trump. And I'll talk about that as I have been talking for the last couple of weeks about the New York law that makes it a felony to falsify a business record to conceal an additional crime, and how Donald Trump is that how Michael Cohen pled guilty to committing federal campaign finance felonies, two of them, that he said in his plea he was directed to do by Donald Trump. And why else would he pay off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal for himself? I mean, why it doesn't even make sense that he did it for any other reason than because he was directed to do it by Donald Trump. And well, I'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself, but if you look down in the video description after clip 10, after Bill Barr's sorry defense of Trump, I do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different screenshots of legal sources that I'm going to show you to explain. I mean, it's all speculation because we haven't seen the indictment, but I'm going to talk about the charges that everyone's been talking about for the last couple of weeks, the falsifying business records to conceal the commission of a campaign finance crime. So I will explain how that is a fairly legitimate charge, might have some statute of limitation problems, but there are reasons that the statute of limitations might not have run on those felonies that have a 5-year statute of limitations. And anyway, I'll get to that, but I thought the Meet the Press news summary was pretty good. They showed a clip from Ron DeSantis and said, notable that Ron DeSantis admits Trump committed misdemeanors, which only have a 2-year statute of limitations. But they didn't talk about Ron DeSantis claiming he would fight the extradition of Trump, even though Trump wasn't going to be extradited, and that violates Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. But anyway, I talked about that before the clip. Here's the Fox News Sunday news summary, where they finally decided to talk about the indictment of Donald Trump as the top story. It's Shannon Bream and Brian Llenas, but they definitely say it's a historically weak case or whatever it is they keep saying on Fox News Sunday or on Fox News every hour all day long. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. It's a week for the history books. The indictment of a former president, a legal first, and it's only just beginning to play out. We expect former President Trump to appear in court as soon as Tuesday. It's also a first for U.S. politics as the Republican presidential frontrunner faces charges and fallout. The early assessment appears to be that this may actually boost Trump's primary campaign chances. But if he's the nominee, it could cost him with those all-important swing voters. In a moment, we're going to speak with Jim Trusty, who is one of the former president's lawyers in yet another investigation. But first, let's turn to Brian Llenas for the latest on the first-of-its-kind court appearance we expect this week. Hello, Brian.
Shannon, former president's team is set to fight the legal merits of this case every step of the way, which could mean months of delays. As of now, they tell Fox it's still too early to talk about possible motions, but there's reportedly a discussion about requesting that this criminal case be moved from Manhattan to more conservative Staten Island for fear Trump won't get a fair trial.
Look, it would be better to get a change of venue. That being said, while I understand the political geographics of New York City and New York County, New York jurors are smart. And they're gritty.
Trump's attorney, Joe Tacopina, says the former president is ready to fight, with zero chance he'll take a plea deal. Trump reportedly faces dozens of charges stemming from alleged hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels and possibly former Playboy model Karen McDougal in the lead-up to the 2016 presidential election. Trump's lawyers say Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is stretching the law for political purposes, arguing the charges are meritless because the payments were personal and never filed with the IRS or FEC.
This was something that would have been made irrespective of the campaign. So there was no filing made. So where is it a false business record? In his own records, in his own personal files?
Still, the exact charges Trump faces are unknown. So are the details about his arraignment on Tuesday. While Trump won't be in handcuffs, well, his attorney says it's possible he could have a perp walk and get a mugshot. And that mugshot could affect his presidential 2024 presidential run. It could actually help him. Why? Well, because his campaign says they raised $4 million in the day after he became the first U.S. president to ever be criminally indicted. Shannon?
Brian Llenas reporting for us from New York. Brian, thank you very much. Joining us now, Jim Trusty. He represents former President Trump in the Mar-a-Lago classified document.
And they have Jim Trusty giving one side, and then they have Bill Barr giving the other side, but it's the same side. That's one of the Fox News biases from Fox News Sunday and Shannon Bream this week. But I think that was probably the most biased of the news summaries, the most pro-Trump, talking about him not being able to get a fair trial in New York and maybe moving it to Staten Island. And they they had that Joe Tacopina clip in there where he's saying, it wasn't for the campaign. It was personal, not for the campaign, which is, of course, not what Michael Cohen pled guilty to, as I will, if you look at the clip list, when I get to the 10A and 10B, I will talk about exactly what after clip 10. I will show a couple still images, 10A and 10B, as to exactly what Michael Cohen pled guilty to back in 2018. But I want to get to the last of the news summaries. This CNN State of the Union one is pretty brief. Not as brief as Face the Nation, but at least it's on the main topic over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is bracing ourselves for a seismic event. As the first ever former U.S. president to face criminal charges prepares to appear in court. Prosecutors, police, the Secret Service, and Trump's team are working out details for his arraignment before a judge in a Manhattan criminal court on Tuesday, where Donald Trump will face a more than 30-count indictment related to business fraud. That indictment is still under seal. It follows District Attorney Alvin Bragg's investigation into a hush money payment by Trump's then personal attorney, Michael Cohen, to an adult film actress just before the 2016 election. In response, true to form, the former president is going on the attack, calling the indictment political, calling it a persecution, and using it to bolster his own 2024 presidential campaign. Well, here with me now is the former president's lawyer for this case, Joe Tacopina. Thank you so much for.
And I will have a clip of Joe Tacopina on CNN State of the Union. I noticed I got a couple of Super Chat contributions along the way. I wanted to thank Tom Trask. McChicken is such a coward. Well, that's one of the things Michael Cohen says, is that he's petrified. Thank you for that. And then Vandal Purdy also gave me a Super Chat contribution. That all makes me feel good about the time and effort I put in to the show today. And so thank you for that. And I have one more brief news summary that, like I said, it's tornadoes. I don't know why CBS News Face the Nation started with tornadoes. Not like they're not news events. Might be, like I said, that if it bleeds, it leads type news bias, because they get to show you video of all this destruction, which I am not going to show you. I'm just going to show you the intro from Margaret Brennan over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin with the severe weather that affected millions this weekend in the South, Midwest, and Northeast. Dozens of tornadoes touched down in at least 8 states, and there are more severe weather alerts for later today in parts of North Texas and southern Oklahoma. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is in hard-hit Wynne, Arkansas this morning. Omar?
Good morning. We are 100.
And so, yeah, I'm not that's not a news event, but it's not as historic as the indictment of Donald Trump. And that's the last of the news summaries. You can tell me which one you think was best, which was worst, or how they compare. I think I gave my opinion already on that. And now I'm going to get to the newsmaker clips. The first two are the biggest newsmakers, I think. Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, who said earlier in this interview, before the clip I'm showing, he said he's running for president, and then he's like the only presidential candidate who is going to criticize Donald Trump so far, criticize him, saying he should drop out of the race because he's been indicted. He doesn't quite go so far as to like criticize him for any of his actions, although he's done that before. But he does mention that he's not a good leader for evangelicals, which seems like something some Republicans should be saying. And then the newsmaker interview with Cyrus Vance that I thought where he talked about how the Trump Justice Department told him not to prosecute Trump because, to hold off. But that's the clip after next. Here's Asa Hutchinson opening up a lane in the Republican presidential candidate race for someone who is not really pro-Trump over here.
Suggested recently that if Trump were to get indicted, that he should drop out of the race. Do you believe that now that he's been indicted? Should he drop out?
Well, I do. First of all, the office is more important than any individual person. And so for the sake of the office of the presidency, I do think that's too much of a sideshow and distraction, and he needs to be able to concentrate on his due process, and there is a presumption of innocence. But the second reason is, throughout my 8 years as governor and as a political leader, I've always said that people don't have to step aside from public office if they're under investigation. But if it reaches the point of criminal charges that have to be answered, the office is always more important than a person.
And he should step aside and no longer run.
Well, he should, but at the same time, we know he's not. And there's not any constitutional requirement. And so he's going to pursue, and I understand that, but I stated my principles and belief and how I think it should be handled. But he's going to proceed on, and so he's going to be a candidate. And I think ultimately the voters are going to have to decide this.
Do you trust this process in New York? Do you think he can get a fair trial, a fair hearing in New York?
Well, the important thing is that the grand jury found probable cause. And that's the standard for any criminal charges in our society. And then the presumption of innocence follows you. And then there's a trial and the determination of guilt or innocence. That's the American system. We don't want to erode confidence in our entire criminal justice system simply because we don't like the beginning parts of the case.
What about the fundamentals of the case? Put aside the legal issues here. The idea of hush money for a porn star to conceal an alleged affair. Does some of this end up making the evangelical voters who supported Trump so strongly in the past think twice about supporting him again?
Well, let's look at the three different investigations. One is the hush money out of New York. Secondly, it is the request and pressure for votes out of Georgia. And the third one, of course, is the mishandling of classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. Those are three very serious investigations. You might say one of them doesn't showcase anything, but when you look at all three of them combined, it should give Americans pause. When you ask about the evangelical community, I'm part of that. Yeah. And I believe that the evangelical community understands that we need to have a leader that can distance themselves from some of the bad instincts that drive Mr. Trump. And I hope that we can do that in the future.
You recently said that
the bad instincts that drive Mr. Trump. That is kind of an understatement. Bad instincts that drive. I mean, the guy is a pathological liar and someone who's committed like many crimes over the course of his lifetime and never been held accountable. I mean, the Mueller report itself had like multiple instances of obstruction of justice, and I talked years ago about how Michael Cohen pled guilty to committing a felony that he was directed to commit by Donald Trump, and federal law says if you direct someone to commit a felony, that is a felony. So why wasn't Trump prosecuted for that? Well, he wasn't prosecuted in New York, apparently. In this next clip, you'll see Cyrus Vance, who was the Manhattan DA before Alvin Bragg, the current DA who brought charges before the grand jury to indict Trump that we're going to see the indictment tomorrow. Well, Cyrus Vance in this next clip that I think has not gotten, this is like big news here. Cyrus Vance says that Bill Barr's Justice Department, Trump's Justice Department, told him to hold off on charging Trump in New York or investigating him in New York for what he's about to be charged with, apparently, with like promises that they were doing it and then they never did. So, yeah, here's Cyrus Vance talking to Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd asks him why he didn't prosecute him back in 2018, 2019, whatever. Then he asks if he thinks he can get a fair trial. Then he asks if he thinks that there are any problems with the legal theory, and I will talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
Why didn't you charge the hush money case? Why didn't you ever charge it in 2018, 2019, 2020?
Well, Chuck, I don't want to get into the deliberations that might be covered by grand jury material, but as I believe you know, I was asked by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District to stand down on our investigation, which had commenced involving the Trump Organization. And as you know, as someone who respects that office a great deal, and believing that they may have perhaps the best laws to investigate, I did so. And I was somewhat surprised after Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty that the federal government did not proceed on the areas in which it asked me to stand down. By that time, we were also well on our way in a financial investigation that ultimately led to subpoenas, which the president himself published in a lawsuit he filed against me in the office, and ultimately that long but successful journey to the Supreme Court. And for those who think this is about politics, I think it's important to remind folks that the review of the president's objections to our seeking his tax and other financial records were reviewed by 2 separate district courts, 2 separate courts of appeal, and twice by the United States Supreme Court, all of whom found no evidence that politics was motivating our actions.
Did your office conclude that a standalone felony charge for these hush money payments wasn't worth it because of so many of the uncertainties around the legal theory, and that's why you were pursuing this larger issue, that this was just one part of sort of of how the Trump Organization either lied or on their business records?
Well, I think, Chuck, again, I don't want to get into our deliberations, but we have historically filed cases of false documentation, elevating them to felonies when federal statutes were involved. It's never been done that I know of with regard to federal election law, which is quite a specific area of law. But I think the question is not so much why didn't I do it or we did it, but why this district attorney is doing it. And that really requires us to be patient and to wait. Yeah. This process isn't going to be accelerated by us talking about it. It's going to be moved by the court at the pace the court sees fit, and I guarantee you the court will want this to move quickly.
Would this case be stronger? Would you have brought this case yourself?
So yeah, there you see Cyrus Vance both break the news I talked about earlier, that he was asked by the Trump Justice Department to hold off on the investigation and charging of Donald Trump for the business record falsification in furtherance of a campaign finance crime under federal election law. He was asked to hold off, and he thought they were going to prosecute him because they prosecuted Michael Cohen for committing felonies that he was directed to commit by Donald Trump, and that is a federal crime. And after a couple more clips, I'll show you all the legal sources proving what I'm talking about. But the other notable thing I thought Cyrus Vance said in the second part of that clip is that the New York law that for falsifying business records that is a felony, a Class E felony, where if you falsify a business record to conceal another crime, that other crime can be a federal crime and has been prosecuted as a felony with a federal crime as the second crime. Not election law, but other federal crimes have been that crime that the business record was falsified to conceal. So that is not a new novel legal theory in New York, which is something that they've been claiming on Fox News all the time, that using a federal crime, you can't do that, but apparently they do that in New York. So, and that's what I've been saying the last couple weeks based on what I'll show you after the next couple clips. But before I get to that, I wanted to show you one more Republican in addition to Asa Hutchinson, who is willing to say negative things about Donald Trump. And Michael Bolton actually, I'm sorry, not Michael Bolton, John Bolton, Michael Bolton is the singer, right? John Bolton, who is already a Trump critic, uh, he, he was part of the Trump administration and then left and became a Trump critic. And he says something really funny about the Republican defense of Trump in the first half of this clip. And then he gives some evidence of political bias in the Trump Justice Department in the second half of this clip. I won't give the specifics because I don't want to spoil the clip and totally pre-criticize it, but I'll talk about both those things a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan talking to John Bolton, not Michael Bolton, excuse me, John Bolton over here.
So as we were just discussing, Republicans seem to be avoiding explicitly defending Mr. Trump's actions and instead attacking the district attorney of Manhattan. But we don't know the details of these charges. We won't until Tuesday, if then. Don't you see there being a danger for Republicans to do that because they are still aligning themselves with the former president, who I know you are sharply critical of?
Yeah, I think it's a big mistake politically for Republicans to do that. And I think it's important to stress that in this case that involves hush money to a porn star to cover up an affair that later involves cooking his company's books, you have not heard a single Trump defender stand up and say, oh, that's not the Donald Trump I know. And it goes to the question of character and fitness for the presidency. I think that Trump's obviously trying to attack the prosecutor, and his supporters are following that. Look, prosecutors have broad discretion, and they should, but they don't have unlimited discretion. If Trump thinks there's prosecutorial misconduct here, violating the laws, violating the prosecutor or lawyer's ethical obligations, he has plenty of opportunities to raise that. But if he can't show that Alvin Bragg has violated the law or violated the ethics rules that are applicable, then he's got to run his own chances. And to my mind, there is a kind of rough justice here, because it's deeply ironic that a person who spent a good part of his 4 years in the White House trying to weaponize the Justice Department against his political enemies is now saying he's the victim of persecution. It's sort of what comes around goes around, Mr. Trump.
So you agree that the Justice Department was weaponized under the Trump administration?
I can attest to it personally. I don't need to look at other stories.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when Trump and his lawyers in the White House and in the Justice Department brought both a civil and a criminal case against me for publishing a book that didn't go through the pre-publication review process when they know that it had been cleared in the regular order, that is abusing the Justice Department. And there are plenty of other examples besides.
Well,
and so first I have to give credit. I'm not a big fan of John Bolton. He's like a neocon warmonger who has some responsibility for the Iraq War, and I'm not a big fan. I'm not saying that he's a great guy, but the thing he said there at the beginning, so I wish people would point that out more, that Republicans who defend Donald Trump on charges of like falsifying business records to pay off a porn star, you don't hear any of them saying, that's not the Donald Trump I know. Donald Trump is a man of great character and would never falsify business records. He could never be involved with a porn star. That is not a defense of Donald Trump you hear from anyone ever. So kudos to John Bolton, despite all of his flaws, for making that point. And then in the second part there, he talked about how the Justice Department was weaponized against him when he tried to write a book, which is sort of a pre-rebuttal of one of the things that former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr says in this next clip. I'll have some more rebuttal for it, but this is kind of a softball interview. I mean, it's not a complete softball interview from Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday, because at one point she does read some things liberals say about Bill Barr, like some, the New York Times and this article in the Atlantic saying he was Trump's toady. And so she, at least in the middle of this clip, does sort of lightly cross-examine him with what the evil liberals say, but she doesn't really back it up and lets him get away with rebutting it without any pushback. And then she starts this questioning here with undercutting what could be a good cross-examination, because, Bill Barr was already out there criticizing this indictment when no one has even seen the indictment, which no one who's been a prosecutor certainly ever ethically, or at least the culture of prosecutors is that you don't criticize another prosecutor without even seeing their indictment. But Shannon Bream here couches her question in, well, knowing what we know, which is nothing, of course, just news reports. Can you criticize this indictment? And Bill Barr says, well, knowing what we know, yes, it's totally political but knowing what we know, we don't even know. So that's bogus. And they talk about, you'll see in this clip, he talks about how the previous prosecutor passed on it without mentioning what Cyrus Vance said earlier, that the federal Justice Department told him to pass on it. Well, anyway, I'm pre-criticizing the clip. I have some other ways to criticize it after we show the clip, but here's Bill Barr's semi-softball interview on Fox News Sunday that I'll talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
Unpack there. We don't know about this indictment on Tuesday. Fair to say you and the president have had a complicated relationship at times, disagreement over whether you quit, whether he fired you, all of those things. But when it comes to this, you do seem to agree this is a political prosecution based on what we know.
Yeah, based on what we know, it certainly appears to be. And I think the American people see that. It's the very essence of the abuse of the prosecutive function, which is pursuing a person rather than pursuing a real crime.
So his critics, though, say that, okay, every American should be subjected to rule and order and justice. And this president, according to the New York Times editorial board, not surprisingly, they think he flirted with that. They say Donald Trump spent years as a candidate in office and out of office, ignoring democratic and legal norms and precedents, trying to bend the Justice Department and the judiciary to his whims and behaving as if rules didn't apply to him. And as the news of the indictment shows, they do. Okay, Piece in the Atlantic back in 2021 talked about your time at the DOJ and said that you were widely seen as a Trump lackey who politicized the Justice Department. So did you ever feel pressure to bend the law or to ignore it? And what do you make of, the president's critics saying this is all just catching up with him now?
Well, as I've said repeatedly, he never directly pressured me to do anything in a criminal case. Now, he's out there tweeting all the time, which made my life difficult, and he was calling for people's scalps. And, from what he said after I left, he was mad at me for not delivering scalps. But the idea that I was a toady was something fostered by the mainstream media. And which of his enemies were prosecuted? Who did I, use the criminal justice process against? And there's usually crickets, because there's not a case of that. But the other thing about this is I think the case, based again on what's being reported, the case lacks any legal basis. It's pursuing somebody there's nothing inherently wrong or illegal about making a hush payment. They're saying he falsified the corporate record. But for that to even be a misdemeanor, you have to be trying to defraud somebody, and it's unclear exactly who was defrauded. This is his own company. And then finally, and most importantly from the federal standpoint, the idea that this was a campaign finance violation is simply wrong. It's wrong on the law.
So he is facing other cases. We've got special counsel investigating the Mar-a-Lago, the documents, January 6th lead up. As somebody who headed up the DOJ, are you confident they can be neutral, that they will be in this case?
I hope they will be, and as I've said repeatedly, I think the document case is the most serious case. I don't think they went after those documents to get Trump. I think they actually wanted the documents back, and what's at issue in that case is not the taking of the documents, it's what he did after the government sought them and subpoenaed them, and whether there was any obstruction. And I think that's the most serious one out there. And the other one, I think the January 6th one, is a difficult case to make, and it also runs into First Amendment issues, where you're going to draw the line between legitimate First Amendment activity, protesting an election, and actually conspiring to undo an election. So that's a difficult case to make, but I'm hopeful the department will approach it properly.
I'll ask you what I asked Jim Trusty as well. If the president was your client, would you put him on the stand? Because I got to imagine in any of these cases, if it gets to trial, he's going to want to defend himself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not his lawyer. Generally, I think it's a bad idea to go on the stand, and I think it's particularly a bad idea for Trump because he lacks all self-control, and it'd be very difficult to prepare him and keep him testifying in a prudent fashion.
Okay, let me ask you about this back and forth. Your legal opinion on the House GOP committee chairs, several of them.
So yeah, you can see Shannon Bream doesn't follow up at all there. She did get one anti-Trump quote there. I mean, he can't testify in a prudent fashion. Is that sort of Bill Barr's understated way of saying that Trump is a pathological liar? Because that is something he probably should have said. But you saw there that Shannon Bream let Bill Barr get away with saying, who did we send the Justice Department after? Who? And all we get is crickets. And all he got from Shannon Bream was crickets. But you heard John Bolton earlier say the Trump Justice Department came after him for writing a book, which is also true. Michael Cohen, who was released during COVID from his sentence, he got sent back to federal prison for also because he was writing a book, and then the Justice Department said that wasn't why, and the federal judge then released him because that was why. So that was like two ways that the Justice Department did go after people and prosecute them. And also Bill Barr set up the John Durham investigation that prosecuted two people who got acquittals. As supposedly the oranges of the investigation and all that stuff. Who was it? John Durham. It was the Michael Sussman and Igor Tichenko. You can Google both those names. They both got acquitted after Bill Barr sicked the Justice Department and John Durham on them when they apparently were not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, at least. And it wasn't just that. The Bill Barr's Justice Department not only went after people criminally in a political way that I just mentioned, but was a shield for people in a political way. They tried to get Roger Stone resentenced, and of course Bill Barr totally spun the Mueller report. That was his debut as Attorney General. So there were many different ways that Bill Barr politicized the Justice Department that Shannon Bream could have followed up on and did not. And then you also saw there she let Bill Barr get away with saying that if the New York District Attorney charges Trump with falsifying business records to conceal a campaign finance violation, well, that's just wrong on the law that it's a campaign finance violation. But again, Trump's Justice Department, and now I'm finally going to show you, prosecuted Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, and two of the things he pled guilty to. Now, I'm going to show you, there's a link down in the video description under sources to Michael Cohen's entire plea allocution. That's like what he said under oath when he was pleading guilty. And it's not only Michael Cohen who is saying this under oath, but the assistant U.S. attorneys who are prosecuting the case aren't supposed to accept the plea unless they have a reasonable basis to believe it's true. And remember, these are U.S. attorneys in Trump's Justice Department. And then the judge, of course, is not supposed to accept the plea unless he believes there's a reasonable basis. So this is in federal court. The first count that Michael Cohen pled guilty to that I'm talking about, count 7, this is the Karen McDougal count, where he says that at the, in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, that's Trump, I am the CEO of a media company, that's David Pecker of the National Enquirer, at the request of the candidate, worked together to keep an individual with information that would be harmful to the candidate and to the campaign from publicly disclosing this information. They paid her $150,000. And see at the very bottom there, it says, for the principal purpose of influencing the election. So that's what you have to prove that is a campaign finance violation, despite what Bill Barr said. And that's the Karen McDougal count. And then count 8 over here, I have highlighted direction in coordination and at the direction of the same candidate, I arranged to make a payment to a second individual. That's the 130,000 payment, and you see at the very bottom it says, for the principal purpose of influencing the election. That's why it's a campaign finance violation, and that's what Michael Cohen pled guilty to. And apparently Cyrus Vance was told that the Trump Justice Department was going to continue pursuing it, and he was surprised that they didn't end up charging Donald Trump. And that's because, check this out, this is 18 U.S.C. Section 2, Principles. Whoever commits an offense against the United States or aids, abets, counsels, commands, induces, or procures its commission is punishable as a principle. So whoever willfully causes an act to be done, which if directly performed by him or another would be an offense against the United States, is punishable as a principle. That is like right at the beginning of the criminal section of the U.S. Code, where if you direct someone to do something that's a felony, you have committed that felony. So if you look at what Michael Cohen pled guilty to, federal felonies that he was directed to do by Donald Trump, that it means Donald Trump is also guilty of the felony. So don't let anyone on Fox News or anyone else say this was a crime that was never charged. It was charged and pled guilty to by Michael Cohen, and it should have been charged. I mean, much more than this. I haven't read the indictment, but I would have been much more happy if someone in the Trump Justice Department, Bill Barr, this is another example of him shielding Donald Trump, not letting the Southern District of New York bring that charge, and the Biden Justice Department could have done it at the beginning. It was still within the statute of limitations. I wish they would have, but anyway, the last two things I want to show you here. First, this is the New York law, the Class E felony. This is the New York Consolidated Law, this Penal Code Section 175-10, falsifying business records in the first degree. If you commit the crime of falsifying a business record in the second degree, which is the misdemeanor, with the intent to defraud includes an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal in the commission thereof. That's the Class E felony with a 5-year statute of limitations. Now, apparently the statute of limitations in New York is stopped from running. Some of the time during COVID, apparently it was supposed to be tolled. And then it's also stopped from running if you are continuously outside of the state, which Trump was for a long period of time. So, I mean, I'm not licensed to practice in New York. I'm only licensed to practice in California and Missouri. So I'm not all up on statute of limitation law in New York. But I would be very surprised if the Manhattan District Attorney's Office doesn't have a strong legal argument for why the 5-year statute of limitation has not yet run. But I don't know. We'll have to see the time period of the crimes too. I can't remember exactly how long Trump kept paying off Michael Cohen, but we'll see in the indictment tomorrow. And then if there's a motion to dismiss on statute of limitations grounds, that's something I can cover more extensively when there are briefs filed on that, but I wanted to show you that. Oh, and then the one other thing, this is from the New York Consolidated Laws, the definitions at the beginning. This is just Section 10 definitions. You can notice here that an offense means conduct which is means conduct for which a sentence to a term of imprisonment or fine is provided by any law of this state or by any law, local law, or ordinance of a political subdivision of the state. So offense means against a crime in New York, but you see crime down here means any misdemeanor or felony. Doesn't say has to be in the state of New York. And if you remember the previous thing I showed you, it's to commit another crime. And a crime doesn't have to be in New York. It can be just any misdemeanor or felony. So that is the last piece of legal source material I wanted to show to rebut some of what I've been hearing on Fox News, what you heard from Bill Barr there, and to pre-criticize or pre-rebut what you're going to hear from Joe Tacopina in this next clip that I don't think Dana Bash does a really good job of cross-examining him on. But it's the final newsmaker clip I wanted to show you, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
A very seasoned attorney, so presumably your strategy is not up in the air. So let's talk about what you're thinking about when it comes to the legal strategy once Donald Trump is arraigned. Are you going to move to dismiss the case right off the bat in the arraignment? And if so, on what grounds?
No, we're not doing anything at the arraignment because that would be showmanship and nothing more because we haven't even seen the indictment yet. You know, we will take the indictment, we will dissect it. The team will look at every potential issue that we will be able to challenge, and we will challenge. And of course, I very much anticipate a motion to dismiss coming because there's no law that fits this. And you have a situation where, you know, the federal government, the Department of Justice turned this matter down. The FEC, which governs federal election laws, said there's no violation here. Yet somehow a state prosecutor has taken a misdemeanor and cobbled together to make it a felony by alleging a violation of federal campaign violations, and the FEC said it doesn't exist.
Right. Let me ask you about that because you mentioned it. You've been talking a lot about the FEC and federal investigations and allegations, investigations, I should say, that didn't end up in an indictment on the federal level. But we haven't seen the specifics, and we should say that over and over again. This is still under seal, this indictment. But because it is on a local level, on a state level, presumably this will be focused on those issues where he allegedly broke the law there, whether it becomes an issue of trying to defraud a business or something along those lines, not necessarily the FEC and things that you're discussing.
No, it can't be. This was a federal presidential election. The allegation here, in some Twilight Zone sort of scenario, is that he settled the civil case 6 years earlier, something that happens, by the way, all the time. A civil case was settled with confidentiality agreements between a lawyer that was representing him and a lawyer representing the Stormy Daniels. Trump didn't even sign that settlement agreement, so they signed it. The lawyer financed it, subsequently gave him a host of invoices for legal services over the course of a year. They were recorded, but understand, here's the key distinction, Dana. They were recorded in their entries. They were never filed anywhere. They were never filed with the IRS. They never took a tax deduction, and they were never filed with the FEC because they weren't required to. This was a personal expenditure, not a campaign expenditure. Had it been a campaign expenditure, he would have used campaign funds, and then, of course, we'd be talking about here today the outrage that Donald Trump used campaign funds for personal expenditure. Right. They'd be baying for his scalp. It's a completely upside-down world. So he's damned if he did and damned if he didn't. So those are misdemeanors, by the way, the record entries, which don't exist. They're not false entries, but assuming they were, they're misdemeanors way beyond the statute of limitations. So they had to cobble them together to try and get a felony.
I'm going to speak to Michael Cohen's attorney next. He says that there is actual evidence that your client...
So Dana Bash moved on, didn't really cross-examine him with any of the things I explained about the law before that clip. I mean, you saw that they're not cobbling together a felony, that it's actually a New York law that if you falsify a business record to conceal another crime, and that's because if what Michael Cohen pled guilty to is true, that he was directed by Trump to commit this campaign finance violation to avoid the stories coming out that might hurt Trump's election about Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. And they called it legal expenses so they wouldn't have to declare it as a benefit to the campaign, because whether it's Trump's money or Michael Cohen's money, Michael Cohen's money that he got paid back, that is still a contribution to the campaign that was never made public, and it was for the benefit of the campaign. Like I said, go back and look at what Michael Cohen pled guilty to in the previous screenshots I showed of his plea allocution, count 7 and count 8. And I don't know why Dana Bash never brought that up. I mean, at least she emphasized at one point that we haven't seen the indictment, which brings me to the final thing I wanted to say again, that I think on Wednesday, sometime Wednesday afternoon, California time, depending on, how many news clips, because I'm going to try to record. I have a whole bunch of tuners and various ways of recording news coverage. So I'm going to try to get all the networks' coverage of Trump's arraignment, and I don't know how many of them will run his speech tomorrow night, but I'll take some clips and hopefully I'll be able to rebut some of the things. I'm sure Trump will say a lot of untrue things in his address to the nation about his political persecution, and by Wednesday, I'll have a chance to read the indictment and give you a much better analysis. So look for that Wednesday afternoon, California time. Not sure exactly when. We'll see how it goes. I do appreciate all of you who showed up for this live stream. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I took into cutting out the clips and putting together the screenshots and adding my experience as a former criminal defense attorney and also longtime political junkie watching these shows. And I will be back next Monday and every Monday through the 2024 election. And I hopefully will be getting to do a lot of special live streams as Donald Trump's criminal prosecutions multiply. Like I said, I believe the Georgia indictments will be coming. I think that grand jury is supposed to expire May 1st. So sometime in the next few weeks, we should be getting the Georgia indictments. And Jack Smith, the special counsel, seems to have Trump dead to rights on obstruction of justice regarding the Mar-a-Lago documents, if nothing else. So that could also be coming this spring. We'll see. And I will be bringing all of that to you every Monday and maybe on special occasions like this Wednesday. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.